your adventure's hook has gone off without a hitch. Your players have dipped their toes into playing their characters, gotten a taste for the kind of action they're in for, and are ready to leave the tavern or road to Phandalin or wherever they happen to have started. When this happens, and whenever your players want to change location, they are probably going to reach for a map. Hopefully, before they do so, they have some sort of direction or idea of where to go, but even if they don't, the right map can't give it to them. Welcome back to Worldbuilding Praxis, where we are building a world from scratch for use as a D&D campaign setting. Last time, we developed our setting's political landscape by populating it with capital cities. In this episode, we're going to zoom into the area where our adventure takes place and design our local map. Local is a pretty vague term, and that's why I used it. The scale of this map, as well as what is depicted on it, is going to depend pretty heavily on your adventure. I've mentioned this before, but we are pretty well past the point of the world building process, crossing into the territory of adventure design. So, should you design your local map or your adventure first? Or should you design them concurrently? The bad news is there's no right answer, but the good news is there's no wrong answer. I've used all three of these approaches and they all work. Since I've already designed an adventure on this channel, I'll be using the adventure first process. If you don't have an adventure ready and you want to follow my workflow exactly, take a look at the adventure speedrun video, and I'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. 16 if you play on 1.25 speed. Regardless of the process you're using, you are likely going to at least want to know the scale of your map before you start working on it. Assuming we're designing a map for a low tier level 1 to 4 adventure, your players are not going to have access to high level conjuration magic, nor are they likely to have access to any other ways of traveling vast distances instantly. So you're probably going to be working with an area between 20 and 150 miles in radius. The map I make in this video, which is about 400 by 600 miles, is what I would consider beyond the top end for the local area of an adventure. And the only reason it ended up being so large is because I wanted to include this entire lake system. Honestly, if I were to actually run this adventure, I would likely make another, more zoomed in map around this area here, to make it easier on myself and my players. As far as the low end of the local area spectrum goes, some adventures take place in a very, very limited area. There are plenty that take place in only one city or even one dungeon. But what I would consider the median for a beginner baseline D&D adventure is a local area with a radius of about 50 miles. This works out to your players never being more than a week's journey from anywhere else on your map. Keeping in line with that baseline D&D I talk about so often, your players will likely start in or near a small town, traditionally in its tavern. But there are plenty of other ways to start your adventure, like placing your players at the entrance of a dungeon or giving them a so-called hot start in the middle of a combat encounter. Regardless, wherever you choose to start your players will also be our map's starting point. During the adventure, your players will have some goal, and to accomplish it, they will probably have to travel away from the starting point, do some exploring, some investigating, and some fighting, assuredly with a few interesting detours along the way. Once they understand the problem and how to fix it, they will travel to your adventure's endpoint, which now and then happens to be the starting point, and have the final battle. So, after taking a look at our adventure, we should make a list of all of the locations that the party will or could go. Thanks to this handy-dandy little organizer here, I know that our local area should include the local town, the starting dungeon, which is located next to an encampment, at least 2 forests, a necromancer's laboratory, and an ancient ziggurat. These are the locations necessary for our adventure, but there are a few other things that I always like to include in my local area. The first is a larger city, possibly but not necessarily the area's capital, which will serve mainly as an off-screen reference. This settlement is where the area's big-shot nobles, magic users, and knights are from. It also gives your players with more eminent backgrounds somewhere close to hail from, if they want to be local. This settlement is large and well-known enough to be regularly referenced by NPCs. Yeah, the snobs over in so-and-so, or they might know in the library of yada yada. Having a place like this to reference is a great tool for helping your players feel like the world around their characters is vast and complex and alive. But when faced with a difficult problem, your players might be tempted to go to this city and ask for help. Here's the trick. This city is a bit too far of a journey for your party to feasibly travel to and back from within the time frame of the adventure. Also, and you can say this to your party in as many words, it's too far away to really care about the problem your party is trying to solve. Otherwise, the aforementioned knights and mages would be saving the blacksmith's daughter, not your party. But referencing the city can be a great way to create some curiosity in your players, planting a seed that can be paid off later on. If not during the adventure, then during downtime activities or during the hook for your next adventure. So we've got all of the locations necessary for our adventure, as well as the largest nearby settlement, but we're not quite done. In the modern style of non-railroaded D&D, no matter how much time you spend brainstorming your party's actions, you are never going to think of everything. The beauty of this style of play can sometimes be its downfall. With total freedom, sometimes comes a feeling of aimlessness. And aimlessness can lead to a DM's worst enemy, boredom. So, to help prevent this, I like to include what I call wildcard locations on my map, near where the adventure's taking place. Most of the time, when your players stray from the path you expected them to take, it's to seek assistance of some kind, or take refuge from a particular danger, or to seek out a specific piece of information which lies between them and their goal. And wildcard locations are simply places they could find at least one of these things. These wildcards can be settlements, singular NPCs, abodes, or anything else you can think of. But their purpose is to give your players a little more direction if they ever find themselves wandering, and somewhere else to go in case they break something. The idea being that once the wandering starts, they could look at their map, spot a point of interest, and say, well, we could try that. Some classic examples of these wildcard locations include a druid's grove, a witch's cottage, or an oracle in a cave. I think 2 of these wildcard locations is more than enough. And since I baked one into the adventure while designing it, the Wizard's Tower, we just need to make one more. While designing your wildcards, remember that the PCs are the main characters, and they need to stay the main characters. So anything you add needs to adhere to the NPC triangle, upon which you may pick 2 of powerful, aligned with the party, and sane. A more general replacement for sane would be dependable. For example, a local farmer, a witch who simply wants to be left alone, or a good-natured fae spirit who is very prone to getting distracted by butterflies. In the case of my map and adventure, I'm going to include a large religious pilgrimage site. My settings almost always have a large amount of interaction between the material plane and mythical forces. And I don't just mean the gods of the pantheon, I mean every powerful interplanar being. You know, high-ranking elementals and the like. A temple populated with clerics is a great way to introduce my players to this aspect of my setting. But to align with the NPC triangle, I'm going to make sure that the deity honored at this particular pilgrimage site isn't one of the more overly benevolent ones, a quality echoed by its adherents. As far as filling in the rest of your map, you can freehand some geographical features that come to mind, or you might choose to generate them with random tables. This is the monstrosity of a table system that I created to roll the geographical features for my very first D&D adventure. You might notice that this page is titled Forest, which seems to imply that there are differently weighted tables based on the larger area's geography. Well, it implies that because it is the case. Here are the numbers in question. You may have noticed that these tables are all titled Temperate Forest, which seems to imply that there is an entire system of tables for every other type of biome. It seems to imply that because it was my intention, I just never got there. I didn't show you these tables to advise you to use them. On the other hand, I showed them to you to try and dissuade you from doing what I did when I was starting out. If you want to use these tables to roll a couple of features, and by a couple I mean 2, fine. But don't give in to the temptation, like I did, of spending hours and hours designing and then rolling on dozens of tables in an attempt to make your map and your setting as fleshed out as possible. If we zoom out on this map, which I was populating with things rolled from these tables, you will see that I did not finish the Cairnwood region. I really didn't even come close. And I'm glad I didn't. This area, with a radius of about 150 miles, was more than enough for 2 full adventures and more than a year of weekly 3-hour sessions. So learn from my example. You don't need an intricate, fully fleshed out map that looks like Faerun or that of another setting which has existed for decades. You need the areas necessary for your adventure and a little more. So add in that larger town or 2 wildcard locations and that's it. Everything else will fall into place as we run our game. And if we need to fill in a little space at some point, we can start rolling then. To start, I sketched out the area's basic geography using our biome map as reference. Since these lakes are part of a rift system, I added some mountains between them and then some forests in the lower altitudes. Next, I added some rivers, starting with the ones I drew a few videos ago, and then adding some smaller ones flowing from high to low altitude. I could certainly have made them windier and added some oxbows here and there, but we aren't going for a photorealistic look, so that's okay. I tried to make sure every geographical feature on our list was accounted for, but I did miss one thing. More on that later. The next thing to do is to let the map tell you where to add things. Here, I overlaid our map of Praxis's ancient civilizations. It's very common for towns and cities to be built on the foundations left by ancient ones, so we're going to situate our largest local town atop this ancient city. Ancient roads were also often repurposed by later peoples, whether to utilize what was left of the road itself, or simply because it was a known, established route from one place to another. Once again, I referred back to our list and started sketching out where I thought its items might be located. While I was doing this, I realized that something had slipped through the cracks. In the adventure speedrun video, I mentioned that the wizard was found in the southern forest. And I didn't have a southern forest, so I plopped in another smaller wooded area. Remember, nothing is canon until it has been seen by an audience. Next, I wanted to know where these large roads are going. I knew the northward one was headed to Trefton, the capital we designed in the previous episode, but what about these two? For now, we'll leave some placeholder names. After that, I added some smaller trails, connecting the larger town and roads to the area's villages. Roads that cross rivers are going to need bridges, and bridges are strategically and commercially very important. This importance often results in a military fort being stationed nearby, which in turn can serve as the nucleation site for a new hamlet or village. As I took a look at the map, I decided that this nice area with a river flowing through a forest into a giant lake would be perfect for a logging town. Little organic ideas like this are encouraged, and in my opinion, more fun than rolling on random tables. One more trail to connect our little logging town to the surrounding area, and voila. Finally, we just have to toss in our wildcard locations, the Wizard's Tower and the Pilgrimage Site, and we're ready to move on. Now it's time to get rid of our placeholder names. To name the forests, lakes, and towns, I'm going to be following a very similar process to what I've used previously on the channel, which I go over in depth in the Writing Your Settings History video. In short, I'm rolling a naming convention, translating the output into one of my settings' naming languages, and then chopping it up a little. I also decided to dedicate the pilgrimage site to Domla the Owl, a lawful neutral deity concerned mostly with large-scale justice. It's possible our PCs would be able to enlist help from the clerics there, but it certainly won't be easy. I also took a quick look at the same tables we used for our capital cities, and give a tiny bit of depth to the larger cities which our roads connect to. It was some very surface level building. I only rolled a population, a name, and a reputation. These cities can serve as even more distant references that can crop up once or twice in our adventure, but I'm mostly rolling this stuff in case a player asks about them. After that, I decided to give Katafi, the largest local city, just a little more depth. The dice decided that it was founded by minotaurs, which is interesting to say the least. This means that I need to know a lot more about the minotaurs of my setting, which is a problem I did not foresee. The good news is that this is a very fun problem to solve, but one that I will be tackling at a later date. Next, I spend a good deal of time cleaning up the map visually, while experimenting with a few new design ideas. This isn't really a cartography channel, and I'm not a visual artist, so I don't want to act like an expert in those respects. Suffice to say, this kind of attention to detail is completely not necessary, especially if you are a new DM starting out. Sketchy maps drawn with pencil on paper and sent through a copier work just fine. You might have noticed that not all of the locations from our list actually made it onto the map. Specifically the ziggurat where the final showdown happens. That's because this is the map your players will see, and the knowledge of some locations will require some exploration, investigation, and some mystery solving. These locations will be marked on the DM version of the map, but I've found that encouraging our players to mark up the map that they have is a great way to engage them. Plus, marking an X on a map once you've uncovered some information is just a lot of fun. One more quick, and by quick I mean 30-minute diversion to make a custom compass rose, and we can stamp this map complete. But we're not quite ready to hit the table. We'll need to know more about our starting town, now known as Casberg, as well as the other areas relevant to our player character's questing, which we will cover in the next and final episode of Worldbuilding Praxis, wherein we will design both a settlement and a dungeon. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to support me, you can do all the normal stuff down here at the bottom, or you can head over to the Patreon, where you can see the videos early for $1, or get your name in the credits for $5. See ya. After that, I decided to give Katafi, the largest local city. Does it sound like Gaddafi? It does sound like Gaddafi. It's fine. Good tip. You should say all of your names out loud once. At least once.